think there's a couple of different things. I think number one, advocates should have a good understanding of how stalking intersects with domestic violence and sexual violence. I think oftentimes when we look at stalking crimes, they're overlooked within the context of domestic and sexual violence. So, for instance, if the stalking is happening within the context of a domestic violence relationship, we oftentimes label it as he's really possessive, he's really controlling, it's all about the power and control, even when the offender might be doing things like following the victim. They might be tracking their text messages. They might be showing up at work. But it seems that when it happens within the context of the relationship and the relationship is still intact, that we oftentimes chalk that up to domestic violence behavior. And it isn't until the victim leaves the offender or they're broken up or there's a court order in place that now when that behavior happens, all of a sudden we label it as stalking. When it was stalking, when it was happening within the context of domestic violence, but we suddenly don't label it stalking until afterwards. And I think the other thing, when we talk about the intersection of stalking and sexual violence, we oftentimes miss the stalking behavior that might happen when we have a sexual assault offender who's grooming the victim, who's gathering information, who engages in that course of conduct to find out how credible the victim is, how vulnerable the victim is, and we don't necessarily view that as stalking. And so advocates who can understand that that stalking behavior is part of domestic and sexual violence can help safety plan with victims. They can help figure out what is in place that can address the stalking behavior. They can help give victims language that they might need if they come forward and report it to law enforcement or the criminal justice system. And I think the other thing that we can really talk about with stalking victims and domestic violence and sexual assault agencies in particular is how are we working with non-intimate partner victims of stalking? Because so often we lump our stalking services within the context of domestic and sexual violence, and we think that people would just somehow know that if I'm a victim of stalking, that I can reach out to the sexual and domestic violence program. But particularly if I'm not being stalked by an intimate partner, how am I supposed to know that the domestic violence program is someplace that I can reach out? Especially if that, for instance, that program might be called family services. Well, if I'm not being stalked by a family member, how do I know that I can get services there? And I think we unintentionally screen victims of stalking out of a lot of our domestic and sexual violence services because we might have a victim who calls for shelter and says, my boss is harassing me and I need a safe place to stay tonight because he's come by my home. And the volunteer who might not have training on stalking gets that call and is like, well, I'm sorry, we only provide shelter for victims of domestic violence. And they end up screening out a victim of stalking.